The sound of flesh striking flesh echoed through the cavernous grand hall of Wolverton Manor, silencing the orchestra instantly. 300 guests frozen in place, their champagne flutes halfway to their lips, as the Dowager Duchess stood with her hand still raised, trembling with rage. On the marble floor, clutching her cheek, sat the young woman in the emerald gown, the one nobody recognized, the one the Dowager had just called a filthy gutter rat. The silence stretched thick and suffocating until the heavy oak doors at the far end of the ballroom slammed open. A deep, thunderous voice, familiar to every terrified noble in the room, shattered the quiet. "How dare you touch the Duchess?" It wasn't just a defense. It was a declaration of war. And the man striding across the floor looked ready to burn the world down for the woman on the ground. Rain lashed against the cobblestones of Grosvenor Square, turning the London streets into rivers of oil and ink. Inside the modest, unassuming townhouse at number 42, Lunette stood before a clouded mirror, her fingers trembling as she fastened the clasp of a simple pearl necklace. It was the only piece of jewelry she owned that truly mattered, a gift given to her under the moonlight in a vineyard outside Vienna, far away from the prying eyes of English society. "You must be brave, my love," the letter on her vanity table read. The ink was still fresh, the handwriting sharp and decisive. "My mother will not understand. She will not accept. But tonight, when I walk through those doors, the world will know you are mine. Do not fear her. Fear nothing." Lunette took a steadying breath. Stephen was a man of his word. As the Duke of Wolverton, he commanded one of the oldest and most formidable fortunes in Britain. But to Lunette, he was simply the man who had found her sketching in a dusty library in Austria, where she had been working as a companion to a minor baroness. He hadn't cared that she was the daughter of a destitute scholar. He hadn't cared that her dowry was non-existent. He had seen her mind, her spirit, and her kindness. They had married in secret 3 months ago, in a small chapel in the Swiss Alps, witnessed only by the priest and Stephen's loyal valet, Anthony. It was a scandal waiting to detonate. The Duke of Wolverton was expected to marry royalty, or at least the daughter of a marquess. He was not expected to marry Lunette Venn, a woman whose only inheritance was a collection of books and a resilient heart. For 3 months, Stephen had kept her hidden in this townhouse while he finalized delicate diplomatic matters for the crown in Vienna. He had returned to England only yesterday. Tonight was the annual Wolverton Winter Ball, the most exclusive event of the season, hosted by his mother, the Dowager Duchess Beatrice. Beatrice. The name alone made Lunette's stomach turn. Beatrice was a woman carved from ice and old money, a matriarch who believed that lineage was superior to morality. She had ruled the Wolverton estate with an iron fist since her husband's death, preserving the family name with a ruthlessness that terrified even the royal court. Lunette smoothed the fabric of her dress. It was a deep, shimmering emerald silk cut in the latest Parisian fashion, but lacking the excessive diamonds and feathers that the London elite favored. It was elegant, understated, and dignified. It was the armor Stephen had sent her. "The carriage is ready, madame." Anthony's voice came from the hallway. The old valet sounded worried. He knew perhaps better than anyone what awaited them at the manor. "Thank you, Anthony," Lunette said, turning away from the mirror. She picked up the heavy invitation card. It was addressed to Mrs. Lunette Venn. Stephen had arranged for her to be invited under her maiden name, to avoid suspicion until he arrived. He was currently at Buckingham Palace briefing the prince on the Austrian treaty, and would arrive at the ball late. That meant Lunette had to enter the lion's den alone. She walked down the narrow stairs, the wood creaking softly under her feet. She wasn't just walking into a party. She was walking into a battlefield. If Beatrice discovered the truth before Stephen arrived, the humiliation would be total. But Lunette touched the hidden wedding ring she wore on a chain beneath her bodice. She was the Duchess of Wolverton. No matter what happened tonight, that was the truth. As the carriage rattled through the dark streets toward the opulent district of Mayfair, Lunette looked out at the gas lamps flickering in the fog. She remembered Stephen's promise, fear nothing. But as the towering silhouette of Wolverton Manor came into view, glowing with the light of 1,000 candles, fear was the only thing she felt. Wolverton Manor was not merely a house, it was a monument to power. The ballroom was a vast expanse of polished marble and gold leaf, illuminated by 3 massive crystal chandeliers that had once hung in a French palace. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume beeswax and the underlying metallic tang of judgment. Lunette handed her wrap to a footman who looked down his nose at her. The announcer at the top of the grand staircase cleared his throat. He paused, looking at the card in his hand, with a slight frown, realizing the lack of a title. "Mrs. Lunette Venn," he announced. His voice lacked the booming enthusiasm he reserved for the landed gentry. A few heads turned. Most didn't. In this room, if you didn't have a title, you were invisible. Lunette descended the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She kept her chin high, moving with the grace her father had taught her, the grace of dignity, not arrogance. The room was a sea of pastel silks, stiff tuxedos, and the flash of heirloom jewels. Conversations buzzed like a hive of angry wasps. Lunette navigated toward the edge of the room, hoping to blend into the shadows near the heavy velvet curtains until Stephen arrived. But invisibility was not an option when the Dowager Duchess Beatrice was on the prowl. Beatrice sat on a velvet settee at the far end of the room, surrounded by a court of sycophants. She wore stiff black taffeta mourning clothes she had adopted 10 years ago, and never shed adorned with the famous Wolverton diamonds. Her grey hair was pulled back so tightly it pulled at the corners of her eyes, giving her a perpetual look of disdain. "Who is that?" Beatrice's voice cut through the chatter of her circle. She pointed a fan, made of ivory and lace, directly at Lunette. Lady Genevieve, a young woman with ambitious eyes, who had been trying to marry Stephen for 3 seasons, leaned in. "I believe the announcer said, 'Mrs. Venn, Your Grace,' a nobody. I heard she was a governess in Vienna." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "A governess in my ballroom who approved the guest list. The Duke sent a specific request for her inclusion before he arrived from the continent," Genevieve whispered, planting the seed of poison. "Perhaps a charity case, or something more sordid." Beatrice stiffened. The idea that her son, the Duke, would invite a working woman to their most prestigious event was an insult to the family crest. She stood up, the diamonds at her throat, flashing dangerously. Across the room, Lunette felt the shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. She saw the crowd parting, creating a wide channel through the center of the ballroom. Coming down that channel was the Dowager Duchess, moving with the slow, predatory momentum of a shark. Lunette's instinct was to run, but she planted her feet. "I am the Duchess," she reminded herself. "I am her equal. I am her superior." Beatrice stopped 3 feet from Lunette. Up close, the older woman smelled of lavender and stale powder. She looked Lunette up and down, her gaze lingering on the simple pearl necklace with a sneer. "I do not know you," Beatrice said. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "And yet you are drinking my champagne." Lunette curtsied a deep, respectful bow that was technically perfect. "Your Grace, I am Lunette Venn." The Duke was kind enough to extend an invitation. "My son has a habit of collecting strays," Beatrice said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear. A ripple of cruel laughter went through the crowd. "He has a soft heart for the unfortunate, but usually he keeps his charity cases in the kitchen, not the ballroom." Lunette felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I assure you, Your Grace, I am not here for charity." "Then why are you here?" Beatrice took a step closer, invading Lunette's personal space. "You are wearing a dress that is clearly a season old. You have no jewelry to speak of, and you stand there with the insolence of a street urchin. Did you think you could snare a husband here? Do you think one of these fine lords would look twice at a woman with calloused hands?" Lunette hid her hands in the folds of her dress. They were calloused from ink and turning pages from working to support her father. "I am here to wait for the Duke," Lunette said quietly. "The Duke?" Beatrice laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "My son is a man of the world. He may have amused himself with you abroad, girl, but do not mistake a dalliance for a place in society. You are dirt on the hem of this family." Lunette's eyes flashed. The insult was too much. "I believe Stephen should be the one to speak on his associations, not you." The use of his first name was a gasp-inducing breach of etiquette. The room went silent. Beatrice's face turned a mottled shade of red. "You dare speak his Christian name?" Beatrice hissed. "You preserve of filth! Get out of my house!" "I will not," Lunette said, her voice trembling but firm. "I have a right to be here." Beatrice signaled to two burly footmen standing near the wall. "Throw her out, and check her purse before she leaves. Women like this usually steal the silverware." The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. "Thief." Lunette recoiled as if she had been slapped. "I have stolen nothing." "We shall see." Lady Genevieve chimed in, stepping forward to stand beside the Dowager. She saw an opportunity to destroy a rival she didn't even fully understand yet. "I did notice my emerald brooch went missing just moments after this woman brushed past me." It was a lie, a blatant, vicious lie. Lunette hadn't been anywhere near Genevieve, but the mob mentality had taken over. The aristocracy smelled blood. They closed in a circle of silk and malice, trapping Lunette against the refreshment table. "Empty your bag," Beatrice commanded, holding out her hand. "No," Lunette said. "This is a violation of dignity. I am a guest." "You are an intruder," Beatrice shouted, losing her icy composure. "You are a stain on this evening. If you will not leave, I will have you dragged out by your hair." One of the footmen hesitated, looking at Lunette. There was something in her posture, a regal defiance that didn't match her supposed station. "Your Grace," the footman murmured. "Perhaps we should wait for His Grace the Duke." "I give the orders in this house until my son walks through that door," Beatrice snapped. She turned back to Lunette. "I will give you one last chance to leave with a shred of your reputation intact. Admit you are a fraud. Admit you seduced my son for money. Admit you are nothing." Lunette looked around the room. She saw the sneers, the averted eyes, the sheer cruelty of a class of people who believed they owned the world. She thought of Stephen, of his kindness, of the way he held her hand when she cried over her father's death. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the man she loved and the life they were building. "I am not a fraud," Lunette said, her voice ringing out clear and true in the silent hall. "And I am not leaving. I am waiting for my husband." The word dropped like a stone into a pond. Husband. Beatrice froze. Her eyes bulged. "What did you say?" "I said I am waiting for my husband," Lunette repeated. Beatrice stared at her for a heartbeat, processing the information. Then she began to laugh. It was a manic, incredulous laugh. "Husband? You think my son married you, you delusional little wretch. He bought you a dress and you think that makes you a duchess." Beatrice reached out and grabbed a glass of red wine from a passing tray. With a flick of her wrist, she threw the contents onto Lunette. The dark red liquid splashed across the emerald silk, soaking into the bodice, staining the pearls dripping down Lunette's shock-pale face. The crowd gasped. This was a breach of decorum, yes, but it was also a spectacle, and they loved it. Lunette stood still, the wine dripping from her chin. She didn't wipe it away. She simply looked at Beatrice with profound sadness. "You have ruined a very expensive dress, Beatrice." "I will ruin your life," Beatrice screamed. She was shaking now, consumed by the fury of being challenged by a nobody. "You are a lying, manipulative harlot. How dare you claim to be married to the Duke? How dare you stand there and mock me?" Beatrice raised her hand. The heavy rings on her fingers caught the light. Lunette saw the blow coming. She didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She stood her ground. The hand connected. The sound of flesh striking flesh echoed through the cavernous grand hall of Wolverton Manor, silencing the orchestra instantly. It was a sharp, brutal crack that seemed to suck the air out of the room. 300 guests froze in place, their champagne flutes halfway to their lips, eyes wide, with a mixture of horror and perverse delight. On the marble floor, clutching her cheek, sat Lunette. The force of the blow had knocked her off balance. The side of her face burned with a searing heat, a rapid blooming of pain that radiated into her jaw. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, where her tooth had cut the inside of her cheek. Beatrice, the Dowager. Duchess stood over her, breathing hard. Her hand was still raised, trembling, not with remorse, but with the adrenaline of unchecked rage. The diamonds on her fingers caught the chandelier light, glittering wildly. For a moment, Beatrice looked almost feral, her veneer of aristocratic civilization stripped away to reveal sheer, ugly territorialism. "Liar!" Beatrice spat at the figure on the floor. "Filthy gutter liar!" Lunette did not cry out. She did not weep. She slowly lifted her head, her eyes bright with unshed tears, and a burgeoning fury of her own, meeting Beatrice's gaze. The red wine stain on her emerald dress looked like a grotesque wound in the harsh light. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. It was broken by a sound from the main entrance hall that made the very foundations of the manor seem to shake. It was the sound of the heavy oak double doors being thrown open with such violence that one of them cracked against the stone wall. Every head turned. Standing in the archway, framed by the gaslight of the foyer, was Stephen, the Duke of Wolverton. He was still wearing the formal court attire he had worn to Buckingham Palace, a severe black tailcoat, a white waistcoat, and the crimson sash of the Order of the Garter draped across his chest. He looked magnificent, and he looked utterly terrifying. His eyes, usually a warm, thoughtful hazel, were currently entirely black. He took in the scene in a single devastating glance. The spilled wine, the terrified crowd, his mother's raised hand, and his wife on the floor. A low growl ripped from his throat. It wasn't a word. It was a primal sound of fury that made the hair on the arms of the seasoned military officers in the room stand on end. He moved. He did not walk. He stalked across the marble floor, covering the distance to the center of the room in long, consuming strides. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea people, stumbling over each other to get out of his path. Lady Genevieve, who moments before had been sneering, shrank back into the shadows, suddenly terrified of being noticed. Stephen reached the center of the room. He did not look at his mother. He dropped to one knee beside Lunette, his movements suddenly gentle, frantic with worry. "Lunette," he choked out, his voice rough. His hands hovered over her face, afraid to cause her more pain. He saw the bright red welt rising rapidly on her cheekbone, stark against her pale skin. "My God! Lunette, look at me." Lunette looked at him. The pain in her face was agonizing, but the look in his eyes, the raw, unfiltered love and devastation acted as a balm. "I'm all right, Stephen," she managed to whisper, though her voice shook. Stephen gently took her hand, his grip iron tight. He helped her to her feet. He did not let go of her. He put his arm around her waist, pulling her solidly against his side, making her part of him. Then slowly, terrifyingly, he turned to face his mother. Beatrice had lowered her hand. She was staring at her son, her chest heaving. For the first time all night, a flicker of genuine fear crossed her face. She had seen Stephen angry before, but she had never seen this cold, murderous stillness. "Stephen," Beatrice began, her voice shrill, trying to regain her authority. "This woman, this creature, she came here uninvited. She insulted me. She claimed silence. The word was not shouted, but it carried more weight than a scream. It was an absolute command." Stephen stared at his mother, as if she were a stranger, someone he had never known. "You struck her," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. "She provoked me," Beatrice cried, gesturing wildly at Lunette. "She threw wine on herself. She was causing a scene. Stephen. She is a gold digger from Vienna. She claims she is married to you." Stephen's jaw tightened. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailcoat and pulled out a folded parchment. He snapped it open. It was a heavy document, sealed with official wax. "She did not claim it," Stephen said, his voice rising so that it carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. "She stated a fact." He held up the document. "This is a marriage certificate dated 3 months ago in Zurich, signed and witnessed binding Stephen Anthony, Sterling, Duke of Wolverton, to Lunette Marie Venn in holy matrimony." A collective gasp ripped through the room. It was the sound of 300 assumptions shattering at once. Stephen lowered the paper, his eyes burning into his mother's. "You did not strike a strumpet, mother. You did not strike a trespasser." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with consequence. "You struck the Duchess of Wolverton." Beatrice staggered back a step, as if he had physically hit her. Her face went grey. She looked from Stephen to the document, then to Lunette, her mind unable to process the magnitude of her error. Stephen turned his attention to the wider room. He scanned the faces of the guests, peers of the realm, socialites, politicians, people he had known his whole life. "Look at her," Stephen commanded the room. "Look at your new Duchess." Everyone looked. They saw a woman in a wine-stained dress, her face swelling, her hair slightly askew. But they also saw a woman standing tall, her head held high, supported by the most powerful man in the room. "For 3 months," Stephen said, his voice thick with emotion. "This woman has been my wife. She married me, with no promise of wealth, no guarantee of acceptance. She married me because she loves me. She is intelligent, she is kind, and she possesses more natural nobility than anyone else standing in this hall tonight." He turned back to his mother, his expression hardening into granite. "And you, mother, the woman who claims to hold the honor of this family above all else. You just publicly assaulted her. You have disgraced yourself, and you have disgraced the name of Wolverton." Beatrice opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was drowning in humiliation. "Anthony," Stephen called out. The elderly valet materialized from the crowd, looking grim. "Your Grace, escort my mother to the dower house," Stephen ordered. "She is no longer welcome in the manor tonight. Furthermore, she is to remain there until I decide what is to be done with her." It was a public banishment, a social execution. Beatrice gasped, clutching her throat. To be sent to the dower house, the smaller secondary residence on the estate intended for widows, was standard, but to be sent there like a naughty child in the middle of her own ball was unheard of. "Stephen, you cannot," Beatrice shrieked, finding her voice. "This is my house. I am the Dowager Duchess, and Lunette is the Duchess." Stephen roared, his control finally snapping. "This is her house now. And if you ever raise a hand to her again, if you ever speak a cross word to her again, I will cut you off without a penny, and you will never set foot on Wolverton land again. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the air, absolute and terrifying. Beatrice looked at her son and realized with dawning horror that he meant every word. He had chosen his wife over his mother. Defeated, shrunken Beatrice allowed Anthony to guide her toward the doors. The crowd parted for her again, but this time it was not out of respect, but out of a desire to avoid contamination by her spectacular fall from grace. When the doors closed behind her, Stephen turned back to Lunette. The rage drained out of him, replaced by an overwhelming tenderness. He lifted a trembling hand and gently cupped her uninjured cheek. "I am so sorry," he whispered, oblivious to the hundreds of people watching them. "I am so sorry. I wasn't here sooner." Lunette leaned into his touch, the adrenaline fading, leaving her shaky. "You are here now," she said softly. Stephen kissed her forehead, a long, lingering kiss of reclamation. Then he turned to the orchestra, who were still sitting with their instruments in their laps, looking terrified. "Play," Stephen commanded. "A waltz." The conductor scrambled to obey. The strains of a Strauss waltz began to fill the tension-thick air. Stephen bowed formally to Lunette. "May I have this dance, Your Grace?" Lunette managed a weak smile, though her cheek throbbed. "You may, Your Grace." He swept her onto the dance floor. They were the only couple dancing. They moved in a slow, elegant circle under the glittering chandeliers, the man in the royal sash and the woman with the wine-stained dress and the bruised face. It was the strangest, most scandalous, and most romantic sight London society had ever witnessed. And as they danced, the message was clear to everyone in the room. The old era was over. The reign of Duchess Lunette had begun in blood and fire, and woe betide anyone who challenged her again. Lunette woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through enormous mullioned windows she did not recognize. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was still in Vienna, in the small attic room of the Baroness's house. But the silk sheets against her skin were too soft, the mattress too deep. She sat up wincing as a sharp pain shot through the left side of her face. Memory crashed down on her like a tidal wave. The ball. The wine. Beatrice. The slap. And Stephen. She looked to her side. Stephen was asleep, lying on his stomach, one arm thrown protectively over her waist, even in slumber. He looked exhausted, deep lines etched between his brows. She slipped out from under his arm and walked to the heavy gilt mirror mounted on the wall opposite the bed. She gasped. The left side of her face was a wreck. An angry purple and blue bruise blossomed across her cheekbone, tracing the shape of Beatrice's hand. Her lip was slightly swollen at the corner. She looked like she had been in a street fight, not a ducal ball. The door to the bedroom creaked open softly. It was Anthony carrying a silver tray with tea and ice, wrapped in a linen cloth. He paused when he saw her, his expression softening with profound sympathy. "Good morning, Your Grace," he whispered, setting the tray down. "His Grace ordered ice for your cheek the moment you woke." "Thank you, Anthony," Lunette said, her voice sounding rusty. It was strange to hear him call her by the title. Stephen stirred at the sound of voices. He sat up quickly, his eyes immediately searching for her. When he saw her standing by the mirror, he threw back the covers and went to her in 2 strides. "Let me see," he said gently, turning her face to the light. He swore softly under his breath. "I should have had her arrested for assault. Dower House is too good for her." "Stephen, she is your mother," Lunette said, taking the ice pack Anthony offered and holding it to her cheek. The cold stung, but it was a relief. "She ceased acting like a mother the moment she hurt you," Stephen said grimly. He took her hands in his. "How do you feel, truly? Like I went 12 rounds with a prize fighter." Lunette tried to joke, but tears welled in her eyes. "I am overwhelmed, Stephen. Last night, the way they looked at me before you arrived, like I was something they had stepped in." "They are fools," Stephen said fiercely. "Sheep following a bitter old shepherd. You are better than all of them combined." He led her to a small seating area by the window. "We need to talk about what happens now. The morning papers will be intense." That was an understatement. By noon, every newspaper in London had a headline screaming about the Wolverton War. The descriptions of the event varied from lurid to libelous. Some papers painted Beatrice as a deranged tyrant. Others painted Lunette as a cunning seductress who had torn a family apart. But all of them agreed on one thing. It was the scandal of the decade. The atmosphere in Wolverton Manor had shifted overnight. The staff who had looked at Lunette with skepticism or outright hostility the previous evening now treated her with terrified reverence. Stephen's public declaration and his ruthless treatment of his own mother had sent a clear message Lunette was untouchable. The housekeeper, Mrs. Croft, a stern woman who had served Beatrice for 30 years, arrived with a breakfast cart. Her hands were shaking slightly as she poured Lunette's coffee. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" Mrs. Croft asked, keeping her eyes lowered. "Thank you, Mrs. Croft. I would like to review the household accounts later today, if you would be so kind as to bring the ledgers to the library," Lunette said. She was terrified inside, but she knew she had to begin, energetic her role immediately. Mrs. Croft looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. Beatrice had never let anyone touch the accounts. "Of course, Your Grace. I will have them ready." Once she was gone, Stephen smiled tiredly. "Well done. Taking command." "I am terrified," Lunette admitted. "I don't know how to be a duchess, Stephen. I know how to catalogue a library. I know how to negotiate carriage fare in fluent German, but I don't know how to run an estate like this." "You will learn," Stephen assured her. "You are the smartest person I know, and you are not alone. I am here. We will do this together, just as we planned in Vienna. But Stephen could not be there every moment. The fallout from the ball required immediate damage control at court. The Prince Regent was demanding an explanation for the public brawling among his highest-ranking nobility. By early afternoon, Stephen had to leave for St. James's Palace, leaving Lunette alone in the vast, echoing manor for the first time as its mistress. She spent the afternoon in the library, burying herself in the ledgers Mrs. Croft had provided. It was comforting work. Numbers didn't judge, they didn't whisper, they didn't slap. She soon realized that Beatrice, while terrifying, had been an indifferent administrator. The estate's finances were a chaotic mess of overlooked rents and extravagant, unnecessary expenditures on social functions. As she worked, Lunette began to feel a flicker of confidence. This she could do. She could bring order to this chaos. She could prove her worth not by wearing diamonds, but by ensuring the Wolverton legacy actually survived. But while Lunette found solace in the books outside the library walls, the forces of reaction were gathering. Beatrice was down, but she was certainly not out. In the seclusion of the dower house, nursing her humiliated pride with liberal amounts of sherry, the Dowager Duchess was plotting her counter-strike, and she was not alone. Lady Genevieve, seeing her own hopes of a ducal coronet turning to ash, had sneaked away from the main house to join her. "We cannot let this stand." "Beatrice," Genevieve hissed, pacing the small drawing room of the dower house. "She is a nobody, a commoner. And now she is running Wolverton. She will ruin us," Beatrice moaned, pressing a vinegar-soaked cloth to her forehead. "Stephen is bewitched. He has lost his mind." "Then we must help him find it," Genevieve said, her eyes narrowing. "We cannot attack the marriage directly. He has acknowledged it publicly, but we can attack her. How she has him wrapped around her finger." "Everyone has a past, Beatrice," Genevieve said slowly, "especially a woman who was wandering around Europe, alone working for scraps. You said she was a governess in Vienna, a companion to some minor Austrian baroness. Von Hesse, I think the name was." Genevieve smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "Austria is a long way away. It is very hard to verify facts from so far afield, and very easy to manufacture new ones." Beatrice sat up, the vinegar cloth falling away. "What are you suggesting?" "I know a man," Genevieve said, "a lawyer of flexible morality. If we were to find this Baroness von Hesse, and if we were to offer her a substantial sum, say enough to restore her own failing fortunes, I wonder what interesting stories she might suddenly remember about her former employee." Beatrice's eyes glittered. It was despicable. It was underhanded. It was exactly the sort of thing she needed. "Do it," Beatrice commanded. "Find the dirt. And if there is no dirt, create it. I want that woman destroyed. I want Stephen to look at her with the same disgust I feel." While Lunette sat in the library, painstakingly balancing columns of figures, unaware of the storm brewing, Genevieve sat at Beatrice's writing desk, dipping a quill into ink, beginning a letter that was designed to end Lunette's life as she knew it. 2 weeks passed. The bruise on Lunette's cheek faded to a yellowish smudge that could be hidden with powder, but the tension in London society did not fade nearly as quickly. Stephen had been working tirelessly. He had smoothed things over with the Prince Regent, framing the incident as an unfortunate family misunderstanding exacerbated by his mother's fragile nerves. He had forced the major newspapers to print retractions of their more salacious claims under threat of crippling libel suits. Lunette, meanwhile, had thrown herself into managing the estate. She had reorganized the household accounts, cutting waste by nearly 20% in a fortnight. She had visited the tenant farmers on the estate, something Beatrice hadn't done in a decade, listening to their concerns about drainage and crop prices. She was winning the respect of the people who actually made Wolverton function, even if the aristocracy still viewed her as an interloper. They decided it was time for Lunette to make her first official public appearance since the ball. A large garden party was being hosted by Lord Harrington, a powerful political ally of Stephen's. It was neutral ground, a chance to show society that they were united, happy, and unaffected by the scandal. The day of the party was glorious, the lawns of Harrington House stretching down to the Thames under a cloudless sky. Lunette wore a gown of pale blue silk, high-necked and long-sleeved, modest, yet undeniably regal. Stephen stayed glued to her side, his presence a shield. For the first hour, things went surprisingly well. Many people fearing Stephen's wrath were politely welcoming. Others were genuinely curious about this mysterious woman who had captured the Iron Duke's heart. Lunette, drawing on her experience navigating the complex social strata of Vienna, was charming, articulate, and surprisingly witty. Stephen watched her with undisguised pride. Then disaster struck. A royal messenger arrived breathless with an urgent dispatch for Stephen. The negotiations with Prussia had hit a critical snag. The Foreign Secretary needed Stephen at Whitehall immediately. Stephen looked torn. "Lunette, I cannot leave you here alone. Not yet." "Go," Lunette urged him, squeezing his hand. "It is state business, Stephen. It is important. I will be fine. I will stay for another hour for appearances, then Anthony will take me home." Reluctantly, Stephen kissed her hand and departed, leaving Lunette standing alone on the immaculate lawn. It took less than 5 minutes for the sharks to circle. Lunette was admiring a prize-winning rosebush when she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Lady Genevieve smiling a brittle smile. "Enjoying the flowers?" "Your Grace," Genevieve asked, the title dripping with sarcasm. "They are lovely," Lunette said, politely preparing to move away. "They remind me of Vienna," Genevieve said loudly. Too loudly. Several nearby conversations stopped. "I always loved the gardens there. You must miss it. Though I suppose your time there ended rather abruptly." Lunette froze. "I do not know what you mean." Genevieve beckoned to a severe-looking man standing nearby. He was holding a leather portfolio. "This is Mr. Croft, a solicitor. He has just returned from a most interesting trip to Austria. He had a fascinating conversation with your former employer, Baroness von Hesse." Lunette felt the blood drain from her face. The Baroness was a vindictive, deeply indebted woman whom Lunette had left because she hadn't been paid in 6 months. "Mr. Croft has brought back a sworn affidavit from the Baroness," Genevieve announced to the growing crowd gathered around them. "It seems, Lunette, that your sudden departure coincided with the disappearance of a rather valuable sapphire parure from the Baroness's safe." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was different than vague insults about her class. This was a direct accusation of grand larceny. "That is a lie," Lunette said, her voice trembling with shock. "The Baroness is lying. I took nothing." She also mentioned, Genevieve continued, enjoying every moment, "that you were frequently seen in the company of certain unsavory characters. Gamblers, known spies for the French. She suggests that your chance meeting with the Duke in that library was perhaps not chance at all. That you targeted him. Perhaps even entrapped him." The implication was clear. Lunette was not just a thief, but a Matahari, a seductress working for foreign powers who had ensnared one of Britain's key diplomats. The crowd recoiled from Lunette as if she were contagious. The whispers began instantly, venomous and excited. A thief. poor Wolverton completely duped. "Where is your proof?" Lunette demanded, fighting the urge to run. "The affidavit is proof," Genevieve sneered. "And the fact that a penniless companion is now wearing Wolverton silk seems proof enough of your ambition." Lunette looked around for support, but found only suspicious, condemning eyes. Stephen was gone. She was alone again, just as she had been at the ball. But this time the accusation wasn't just about her social standing. It was aimed at destroying her integrity, her marriage, and potentially Stephen's career. "I will not stand here and listen to this slander," Lunette said, lifting her chin. "Running away, Your Grace." Genevieve laughed. "Just like you ran from Vienna." Lunette turned and walked toward the exit, her back straight, every step an act of will. She could feel the eyes burning into her back. She heard the laughter. She knew that by tomorrow this new scandal would dwarf the last one. Beatrice and Genevieve had planted a seed of doubt that could grow to strangle everything she and Stephen had built. As she stepped into her carriage, the brave facade crumbled, and she buried her face in her hands, wondering if love was enough to survive this kind of hate. Stephen returned late that night to find the manor plunged in gloom. He found Lunette in their bedroom, sitting by the unlit fireplace, still in her blue dress. She wasn't crying. She was just staring into the darkness. When he entered, she silently handed him the portfolio Genevieve's lawyer had conveniently delivered to the house. Stephen read the affidavit from Baroness von Hesse. His face grew darker with every line. "It's all lies, Stephen," Lunette said hollowly. "She owed me wages. I never touched her jewels. And spies, I spent my time in libraries and museums." Stephen crumpled the paper in his fist. "I know it's lies. The Baroness is a known gambler. She likely sold the sapphires herself years ago. And Genevieve is a viper." "But everyone believes it," Lunette whispered. "I saw their faces today. They think I am a criminal who tricked you." Stephen knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "Lunette, look at me. I don't care what they think. I know who you are. I fell in love with your honesty, your brilliance. Nothing they say changes that." "Doesn't it?" Lunette asked sadly. "Stephen, this could ruin you. If they think your wife is a foreign agent, the prince will not trust you. Your career—" "My career means nothing without you," Stephen said fiercely. "We will fight this. I will hire the best investigators. We will tear the Baroness's testimony apart." "No," Lunette said slowly, a strange light entering her eyes. She stood up, pulling her hands free. She walked to the window, looking out at the dark expanse of the Wolverton estate. "Lunette, you always fight for me, Stephen. At the ball, with the prince. You are always my shield." She turned back to face him. "But I cannot be Duchess if I am always hiding behind you. This attack was on me, and I must be the one to answer it." "What are you going to do?" Stephen asked, hearing a new steel in her voice. "I'm going to use what I have," Lunette said. "They think I am just a poor companion. They forget what a companion does. I managed the Baroness's correspondence. I organized her life. I know where she hid her skeletons." The next morning, Lunette did not hide. She went to the library. She didn't look at accounts this time. She wrote letters. She wrote to the curator of the Vienna archives, a kind old man she had befriended. She wrote to the Baroness's former maid, whom Lunette had helped when she fell ill. She wrote to the landlord of the building where the Baroness rented her rooms. Lunette remembered things. She remembered the Baroness complaining about the high interest rates of a certain moneylender in Prague. She remembered the dates the Baroness had claimed. The jewels were stolen dates, when the Baroness was supposedly away at a spa. A spa that Lunette recalled was suspiciously close to a famous casino. Lunette used her knowledge of German, her impeccable memory for detail, and her understanding of bureaucratic systems. She compiled a dossier of her own. It took a week for the replies to return via express courier. When they did, Lunette laid them out on the library table. Proof that the Baroness had pawned the sapphire parure 6 months before Lunette even left her service. Sworn statements from neighbors affirming Lunette's quiet, studious life. A letter from the Vienna police stating the Baroness was currently under investigation for insurance fraud. It was devastating. It was complete exoneration. "We should take this to the newspapers," Stephen said, looking at the evidence with awe. "No," Lunette said. "Newspapers are for scandals. This is about power." She picked up the documents. "I'm going to the Dower House." Stephen started. "To my mother, Lunette let me." "No, Stephen. This is between Her Grace and myself." Lunette rode to the Dower House alone. She was shown into the drawing room, where Beatrice was sitting with Genevieve looking smug. "Well?" Beatrice sneered. "Look who it is. Come to beg for an annulment. It might be the only way to save Stephen's reputation now." Genevieve smirked. "I hear the Vienna police can be very harsh on thieves." Lunette did not sit down. She walked to the center of the room and dropped the thick file of papers onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "What is this rubbish?" Beatrice demanded. "The truth," Lunette said calmly. "It is all there. The Baroness's pawn tickets for the sapphires dated a year ago, witness testimonies, the records of the bribe money paid by Genevieve's solicitor to the Baroness." Genevieve's smirk vanished. She lunged for the papers, but Lunette laid a hand on them. "Ah," Lunette said softly. "I wouldn't. These are copies. The originals are with Stephen's lawyer, ready to be sent to the Prince Regent and the magistrate, if necessary." Beatrice went pale. Bribery, conspiracy, fraud. If this came out, Genevieve would be ruined, and Beatrice would be brutally ostracized by the very society she worshipped. "What do you want?" Beatrice whispered, shrinking into her chair. Lunette looked down at the woman who had slapped her, the woman who had tried to destroy her. She felt no triumph, only a profound sense of clarity. "I want peace," Lunette said. "I am the Duchess of Wolverton. That is a fact. You will accept it. You will cease your scheming. You will treat me with the respect due to my station and my husband." She looked at Genevieve. "And you? You will leave London tomorrow. You will take a very long trip to the continent for your health, and you will never speak my name again." "And if we refuse?" Genevieve challenged weakly. "Then I release these documents," Lunette said simply, "and the world sees exactly who the real villains are." The silence in the room was absolute. Beatrice looked at Lunette and saw for the first time not a gutter rat, but a ruler. She saw the same steel that was in Stephen. "Very well," Beatrice said hoarsely. "You have won." Lunette nodded once. "I expect to see you at dinner at the main house on Sunday, Beatrice. We will sit together as a family, and you will be polite." She turned and walked out of the Dower House, leaving the past behind her. That Sunday the dinner took place. It was stiff, it was awkward, but Beatrice was there, and she was polite. Word spread through society faster than fire. The Dowager had bent the knee. The accusations against Lunette evaporated like mist. A month later, Wolverton Manor hosted another ball. It was Lunette's official debut as hostess. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, Stephen at her side. She wore emerald green again, but this dress was brand new, covered in Wolverton diamonds that Stephen had insisted she wear. The announcer cleared his throat. His voice boomed with genuine respect this time. "Their Graces the Duke and Duchess of Wolverton." Lunette descended the stairs. There were no whispers this time. No sneers. As she reached the marble floor where she had once fallen, the crowd bowed and curtsied in unison, a wave of silk and velvet, lowering in deference to the undisputed mistress of Wolverton. Lunette smiled. She looked at Stephen, who was looking at her like she was the only woman in the world. They had survived the fire, and they had forged something unbreakable. The Duchess had arrived, and she was here to stay. From a secret wedding in Vienna to the scandalous floor of the Wolverton ballroom, Lunette and Stephen's story proves that true nobility has nothing to do with lineage and everything to do with courage and love. Lunette faced down the most formidable social powers in England, not with cruelty, but with intelligence, dignity, and an unwavering belief in her own worth. She didn't just marry a duke. She earned her crown. If you were captivated by this tale of romance, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, please give this video a like and share it with fellow lovers of historical drama. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. What did you think of Lunette's final confrontation with Beatrice? Let us know in the comments below.